Hello, and thank you for joining us today. We'll meet the 3 finalists for Police Chief of Cedar Falls. Candidates were solicited nationwide in February, and of the 5 applicants, these 3 met the listed requirements in the solicitation. The 3 finalists are now meeting for conversations with civic leaders, surrounding law enforcement leaders, community stakeholder groups, and senior city managers. After taking in feedback from each of these groups about the candidates, I'll send to the City Council a nomination for one of these finalists. The City Council will then consider approving my nomination in the weeks ahead, and we will continue to keep the community updated about the process. The COVID-19 pandemic has made this process a little more complex. I would have preferred to host an informal meet and greet session in the council chambers for you to connect with each of the finalists, but to avoid the spread of coronavirus, I'm instead recording this video series for you. I've invited the public to send in questions to me to ask each finalist on your behalf, and I'll ask these questions now. We're here now with Assistant Chief Craig Berte. We have a few questions for you as well. I'd like to ask first, how has your past experience prepared you for this critical leadership position?
All right. Well, I'll give you a little background on my experience at the Cedar Falls Police Department. I was hired at the Cedar Falls Police in 1991. I've served there. I got promoted to sergeant in 2001. I've been a lieutenant. I've been a captain. I've served as the assistant chief for the last 4 years. I've had a lot of experiences in the investigative unit and in patrol. Probably the most specific for the police chief position would be my last 4 years as assistant police chief. So I worked with the budget. I assisted the chief of police really on all matters at the police department. So the one duty that has prepared me the most would be my last 4 years as assistant chief. But all my other supervisory positions, as a captain, I supervise either first, second, and third shift, also the investigative unit. I served as an investigator in the late 90s. So all those positions have prepared me to be the police chief.
Okay. I had a question in from TJ Frine. He asked, how would you seek to strengthen police and community engagement in Cedar Falls?
All right. Well, one thing, we do a fairly good job at that now. Some places that we could improve would be trying to do, anything we get out in the community. The more trails patrols we can do with our gator or on bikes. We do some joint bike patrols with the UNI Police Department. Trying to do more of those. Anything along those lines helps. Foot patrols on our downtown, foot patrols on College Hill. We do a lot of foot patrols in the evening when College Hill is active. But anything we can do to get out in the community, I'm definitely a fan of that. So we want to do those things. So those would be some of the ideas I can think of right away to get out in the community.
Okay. This question was suggested by Kelly Stern. What's a significant challenge facing our community, and how will you use your influence as police chief to facilitate solutions?
Well, I would say one challenge that I can think of is we live in an extremely safe community, but we do have, we have an area near the college where we have a lot of alcohol-related activity in the late hours. So one thing we've done and will continue to do is, mass our forces when we need them in those evening hours. We've hired some extra foot patrols up there. We've made great investments in cameras for the downtown and the College Hill area. We direct our officers to be very vigilant in those areas. So we want the Cedar Falls Police Department to be a deterrent to criminal activity. And like I said, we have an extremely safe community, but that is a concern of ours that we keep an eye on and just try and make sure we don't have problems up in that area that reflect poorly on the community or put anybody at risk.
Okay. This position requires an understanding of goal setting and strategic planning. How would you incorporate strategic planning into your decision-making process as the police chief?
Could you ask that again?
Sure. It says, this position requires an understanding of goal setting and strategic planning. How would you incorporate strategic planning into your decision-making process as police chief?
All right. Well, I've been involved in some of that for the last few years as the assistant chief. We take input from our supervisory staff and our command staff, work with the director of public safety and with the fire chief on, setting our goals for the future. Some of those goals will also tie into, they cost money, so it ties into possibly, the CIP process for the city or for future budgeting. So I've been involved in that before, and really it comes down to is, looking ahead, making those plans. If there's a cost to it, setting it up so it's either in the budget or it's purchased through CIP, and then executing those plans in the future.
Okay, thank you. A question suggested by Truman Stone was, in our professional lives, we've all experienced mistakes and failures. Can you give an example of a professional mistake or failure and what you learned from that experience?
Well, I've definitely made mistakes through the years. I've been on the police department for 30 years. Could you ask the question again?
Sure. In our professional lives, we've all experienced mistakes and failures. Can you give an example of a professional mistake or failure and what you learned from that experience?
Okay. Well, I can think of, one recently is, when you work with budgets and kind of like you got into before, you have to forecast things and make your best guess. And so sometimes as you're planning the budget, those things aren't actually executed for 12 or 18 months later. So we've had times where I was involved in planning things or planning purchases that then later on when it gets down to it, the money's getting tight and we've had to make, money adjustments or pull from one fund and cover it. So that's definitely a recent example I can think of. And really the lesson learned is to, be better in planning in the future and know what your expected costs are going to be. So that's just one that I can think of.
Okay. How have you utilized the experience of subordinates in areas where you're not an expert?
Well, on the police department, we have really from our rank of, we have captains, we have lieutenants, we have patrol officers. They all have different specialties. And so, we really, on a lot of our tasks, we go to who that specialist is. For example, we have a lieutenant who oversees our field training officer program. We have a captain who supervises our SWAT team in conjunction with a lieutenant. Our firearms instructors are lieutenants and officers who are in charge of our firearms program. I could go on and on about specialties within the police department that are overseen by, either officers, lieutenants, or captains. Another example I can think of is our honor guard for the police is a lieutenant is in charge of that. We have a group of CPR people who teach CPR. There's a lieutenant in charge of that. So all across our department, people are subject matter experts. And so I use those subordinates, rely on the information that they give me as assistant chief or chief. And so that's how we've always operated.
Okay. A question in from Nicholas Rosauer was, what should the role of law enforcement be in addressing our current mental health epidemic?
Well, law enforcement has a big hand in it, and that has definitely been on the forefront, most recently in the last few years. One thing earlier in one of my interviews today, I attended a crisis intervention training back in 1997, and for our area, it was kind of the inaugural crisis intervention training dealing with mental health for law enforcement. Since that time, there's been all kinds of iterations of that in law enforcement. And so currently, throughout 2020 and into 2021, one of the goals here in the county really is to get as many law enforcement officers in Blackhawk County to crisis intervention training. It's a 3-day training. And we're working with the Sheriff's Department, Waterloo Police Department, all the departments in the county, and Department of Corrections Services on accomplishing that and doing it through a train-the-trainer process where we would get a certain amount of people, export them out, get them trained, bring them back. And the goal would be to train every law enforcement officer in Blackhawk County, but immediately just to start training as many as we can. So the mental health calls are increasing. They're increasing in severity. I understand that, and so we are addressing that and working on that. So regardless of this chief process, that's something we've been working on. So
okay. As a follow-up, you answered this a little bit already, is also from Nicholas Rosauer. How much mental health crisis training should Cedar Falls police officers receive to effectively respond to these kinds of calls and incidents?
Well, I would say the first, we've had some short trainings, a few hours here, a few hours there, or 1-day training. But our goal here real shortly is that all of our officers would get 3 days worth of training, or as many as possible in Blackhawk County, and then build on that. Some of them, the trainers would have 1 week of training. And then there's also obviously the tie-in with the hospital and the paramedics. So we've been dealing with this topic. The sheriff and the other police chiefs are dealing with it. So it is something where we will be doing more training on it.
Okay. This question was suggested by T.J. Frine. When you have disagreed with a superior, how did you resolve this disagreement?
Well, throughout anybody's career, that definitely happens. I would say if I disagree with a superior, usually I, take a little time, build my case on why I disagree or what I think the problem is. And then I think the most important thing is communication. Go talk to that person, explain your side of it or your point of view, and hopefully you come to some compromise. Even if I do agree and I've explained it and done everything, I like to use the saying that, I'm a good soldier and I'll move out and do what I'm told to do. But I think the biggest thing is just communication, that you're trying to convey why you don't agree or a different point of view. And I would say most times it seems like you end up with a solution somewhere in the middle.
Okay. And back into that question, I apologize. The way I had asked it was when you have disagreed with the superior. It was asked to me as when have you disagreed with the superior, just as an example, just to keep it fair among the candidates.
Okay. Well, I would say through my, police, I was in the military active duty and into the Guard and Reserve for 26 years. So I can think of several times where I disagreed with a point of view. I definitely have in the police department over 30 years. I don't know if I can think of a specific example, but I would say in the police department, it probably the more typical one might not be disagreeing with a supervisor, but we always would have captains meetings, and I was a captain since 2004. And the captains are all very senior in the police department, and we sit around a conference table, and I would say the majority of the time, we do not agree when we come into meetings. And we have great discussions. Everybody has a lot of candor. And it doesn't matter if you're the chief or the assistant chief or the captain or even a lieutenant in the room. We have great discussions, and we come to a resolution. Sometimes it's by the democratic process too. We actually physically vote, and everybody respects it when we leave the room. I would say even right now in our labor management committee in public safety, which is made up of employees from police and fire and management, that's a very democratic process there too, and great discussions. And we touch on a lot of very delicate topics. And so you've got everybody from the director of public safety down to firefighters and police. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's very common that we don't agree, but we find common ground in the end. It may not always be with a supervisor, like the question asks.
Okay, thank you. How do you see this police chief role differently than in other cities, since you'll be working for a public safety director and not a city manager or mayor?
All right. Well, our police chief role in Cedar Falls is a little different, and it's been that way for a long time. We had public safety back in the 80s, and you had a fire chief and a police chief that answered to the director of public safety. So, it's just different. I wouldn't say it's better or worse. Most police chiefs, just like you said, are answering to a city manager or a mayor. I would say probably one advantage is if you are answering to a director of public safety, there's probably more consistency than if you're answering to an elected mayor. You might have a little less consistency with turnover or elections. Mm-hmm. But really, I've been a police supervisor for a long time. You're always going to answer to somebody. And so the police chief in Cedar Falls just answers to the director of public safety. So I don't think it's better or worse, or it's just different.
Okay.
Probably one advantage would be is that you also can collaborate a little more. And in my case, or the case of anybody getting this job, is the director of public safety is our former police chief. So in terms of perspectives and getting advice, that's obviously a great asset to have right there.
All right. The last official question I have for the candidates is also suggested by Kelly Stern. To whom is the police chief most accountable and why?
Well, that's actually a really good question, because I view it as you're the community's police chief. So really, you answer to the community, but at the same time, you're also the leader of the organization. So in terms of enforcing policy and enforcing standard and, setting the rules and regulations, you've got that piece of it. But really, that police chief, similar to the mayor's role, you answer to the citizens, really from morning till night. And, even as the assistant police chief, if I'm out in public and somebody knows my role, you always hear their concerns. And if it's something you can take back and affect, we always do that. So I see police chief definitely as twofold, that you answer to the community, but you're also in charge of all the employees of the police division, and that's a significant role.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and that fills out my formal question, so I get to ask a bonus one for you.
All right.
What's been your favorite or most rewarding experience in law enforcement so far?
Well, I would say, and that's actually pretty easy for me. My most rewarding probably is I've worked here for 30 years, or just about 30 years, and I grew up on a farm in north central Iowa, so I didn't have any connections to Cedar Falls. But I would say one of the most rewarding things for me is to be doing law enforcement and maybe working on College Hill or working on Community Main Street, and people view you as their police department. You know, this is our police department. They're here to, protect the citizens of Cedar Falls. It seems like if you work an event at either of those places, there's just great conversation. Everybody's happy to see you. And so that's just always a very inviting and good feeling if you're going out and working somewhere. So downtown, especially lately, if you work a daytime event or if you're working at Sturgis Falls or something, it's very rewarding. It's very pleasant. It's very enjoyable. I always joke around, like if I work Sturgis Falls, I'd do the same thing if I was working or if I was off duty. It's just interacting with people and, seeing what's going on. So I would say that's the most rewarding work around here.
Okay. And with a few minutes remaining, I can ask too, is there any question you wish I'd asked you?
No, I probably, when I gave my history at the beginning, the question was about what's prepared me. One other thing about me that I think has helped me in terms of leadership and team building is I did serve in the Army or the Army National Guard for almost 27 years. So I served from 86 to 2012. I went to Afghanistan for a year in 2010. I was awarded a Bronze Star Medal. I'm very proud of my military service. I'm also extremely happy to be retired from it. But in my latter years as a sergeant major, there was a lot of work, a lot of team building. And so I think some of those experiences definitely helped me anytime in any organization. So I didn't cover that in my bio. So.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming in.
All right. Thank you, Bear.
Look forward to more conversation soon.
All right.
This has been one of 3 conversations with the Cedar Falls Police Chief finalists. I invite you to watch the other 2 videos and send your thoughts to me at rob.green@cedarfalls.com. Thanks for doing the work to be informed and engaged residents.